lessons from a canceled SAP S4HANA implementation, and Joule AI in the new public cloud edition of SAP. Those are just a few topics we're going to cover here in episode 6 of Journey to S4HANA.
Welcome to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that covers everything related to SAP implementations. This podcast is not affiliated with SAP and covers the realistic truth behind S4HANA, Ariba, and SuccessFactors ERP implementation success. Whether you're new to the world of SAP, an existing ECC, or R3 customer, a multinational team, or a mid-sized organization, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberly.
Hello, welcome to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that covers everything related to S4HANA transformations, including the implementation of new technologies and everything you need to know to make your S4HANA implementation successful. This podcast is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that helps clients not only through their S4HANA implementations, but also through other types of ERP implementations and digital transformation initiatives. This podcast is produced by Major Tom Productions. And for sponsorship opportunities on this podcast, you can go reach out to us by contacting us via the contact information below in the description field for this podcast, or you'll find the description or the contact information scrolling at the bottom of the screen as we go through the conversation here today. You can find past episodes and upcoming episodes of this podcast at the website journey2s4hana.com. So be sure to check that out for any of the episodes you may have missed. And joining me, as always, is Darian Fiakuski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited for another episode.
Me too. I'm excited. We've covered a lot of different things. And if you haven't been watching this podcast or keeping up, or maybe this is the first time you've seen the podcast, I just want to do a quick recap of some of the topics we've covered. In the first episode of this show, we talked about S4HANA trends and some of the challenges with RISE. We talked about that with David Essex from TechTarget. We also talked about in episode 2, keys to success for S4HANA implementations, and that was Dave Beldick from the Third Stage Consulting team. Episode 3, we had a case study from a manufacturer that just recently implemented S4HANA. We also talked about lessons from the Hershey's S4HANA failure. That was in episode 3. And then episode 4, we talked about SAP's RISE, GROW, and their impact on SAP projects. And then we also had in season 5 just last week, in episode 5, I should say, last week, we talked about SAP's AI and innovation, as well as the mass restructuring at SAP. And we're going to talk more about AI again this week. We talked about it last week in episode 5. We're going to talk about it again here today in terms of Joule AI in the public cloud edition of S4HANA. And our main interview today is going to be with Mitch Ottoson from the Third Stage Consulting team. And he's going to be on talking about a recent client of ours at Third Stage that canceled their S4HANA implementation. And there's a number of reasons why this happened. We're going to unpack those reasons of why this project was canceled and what some of the failure points were and some of the lessons from that implementation. And the whole idea here today is to share that interview with you and to have that conversation together so that we can learn about the things we should not do on our S4HANA projects and the things that we should do to be more successful. So we'll unpack that sort of failure case study here later today. But before we jump into that interview with Mitch, I know you've got some audience questions from social media, Darian. So what do you have for us?
Yeah, so I have some interesting questions, or a question today. This is about SAP and the time frame they have set for companies to transition to the cloud base. This user believes that they strongly believe, they say, that they will extend this transition period to further out, since it is still a very aggressive timeline for global big organizations to operate on a combination of multiple legacy ERPs and multiple SAP ECCs instances. Eric, what are your takes on this? Do you think that SAP will have to extend, or do you think they're going to hold pretty strong?
No, I agree with this person. I think they probably will extend it. I don't know that I would necessarily bank my entire career or my entire digital transformation on the fact that they might extend it, but I do think they will, just because you're dealing with some really big, complex organizations that have been using legacy SAP products for decades now. And, some of them are still on R3 and some of the really old versions of SAP, and untangling that mess and getting to SAP S4HANA is just a lot more complicated than it sounds for a lot of organizations. So if you're a large organization here in 2024 and you haven't started that migration yet, you're probably going to miss that deadline anyway. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have SAP forced with a decision of, do we stick to our guns and sunset these old products in 2027, knowing that some of the world's largest organizations and the most high profile organizations are still using legacy systems? I don't think that's a gamble that SAP is going to want to make, especially, kind of the PR nightmare that could create for them, especially having such big, high-profile clients. So I think they will extend that. I don't see another way around that. I think they're still aggressively trying to get more and more people to make that migration with Rise and some of the other things we've talked about in other episodes on this show. So I do think that's. I think that's where we're at with the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. I could see that happening as well, just because if these big organizations can't get on to the cloud in that time frame, I don't think that's some good marketing on their perspective either. Or, like you said, PR, that they might receive some public backlash from that if it doesn't get extended. So
yeah, and I'd love to next week, actually, in the next episode, in episode 7 of this podcast, we are going to have Marcus Harris on the show, who's an attorney who deals with S4HANA contracts and S4HANA legal issues and failures. That might be a good question for us to ask him next week to get sort of his legal perspective on the sunsetting of the product as well.
yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to dive into our topic today, though, for SAP and their early adopter care program, Joule, which is their AI co-pilot for S4HANA. So we can dive right into that. So basically what Joule is, it is through their early adopter care program. Joule is an AI-powered co-pilot that can redefine user interactions, streamline business processes, and enhance productivity. It can offer quick contextual access to content and applications, and users simply ask Joule for guidance and can get pointed in the right direction. That's what SAP says that Joule is. So, Eric, with AI releasing a co-pilot such as Joule, is this becoming like a required functionality within an ERP system in the future? Are you going to see that happen more frequently across all softwares, or what are you kind of thinking on that front?
I think we will. I mean, it's hard to see or imagine a scenario where you wouldn't see that, simply because not only are we as consumers getting more and more comfortable with AI with the evolution of ChatGPT and the sort of mainstream acceptance of ChatGPT in a very short time frame. I mean, it's only been a little over a year that ChatGPT really burst into the mainstream in pop culture, even in many cases. So the fact that consumers and we in our consumer lives are comfortable with and getting used to ChatGPT means that eventually you're going to have enterprise technologies that kind of match that consumer experience. We saw the same thing like when, 20 years ago, when Facebook and some of the social media platforms were just evolving. You saw the ERP vendors sort of race to create a user interface that felt more like a consumer grade technology. And I think that's what you're going to see here is you're going to create heightened expectations, or you're going to face heightened expectations from your users in organizations to have technology that's as easy to use as their technologies that they're using outside of work. So I think that's probably where we're headed. Plus, you think about just the ease of use of contextual and conversational generative AI, and you compare that to like the 90s when I was first starting out in the ERP space. Back in the 90s, that was before they had the graphical user interfaces. When you would, like you look at Microsoft Word now and you go to File at the top of the screen, it drops down a menu, you choose Open or Save or whatever, sort of a menu-driven user interface. We didn't really have those back in the 90s. It was still a lot of like transaction codes you'd have to memorize. Like I'd have to remember, or a user would have to remember a random numerical and alphanumeric code that was the code to get to a certain screen. So rather than going through a menu, I would have to remember that I go to X to A R. That's the name of the screen I have to go to get to do whatever, create a PO or whatever. Or at least a lot of software is that way. So you kind of look back and how everything's evolved it went from that transaction code mentality to more user interface. And now I think AI and conversing with the system is going to be the next evolution. And it only makes sense because now instead of having to figure out which menu to go to or which screen to get to, I can just go in the system and ask it, tell me what my inventory is in this warehouse or this warehouse location or in this bin, or tell me how many parts I have in stock that are this SKU or whatever it is. I mean, you could just start asking the system stuff like that instead of having to go search for it in a system, and it really creates a better user interface now. Now, instead of having humans that have to dig into a system and go find stuff, now we can just think about what we need and ask the system to get it for us. So I think it's a natural evolution that's, in my opinion, inevitable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely think it's something exciting, like you said, that people are going to use it in their consumer life anyway. So why not move it to more of their business or professional facing life as well when they're working with these systems? But what challenges do you see that putting AI in, like Joule in SAP S4HANA, what challenges do you think SAP will face with that?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing is going to be just user adoption. I think in the short term, people are still going to just be more comfortable going to their menus and knowing that I can go to this certain screen and see a report or a dashboard that looks exactly the same. And I don't imagine they're going to replace that ability to do that, but I think people might revert back to what they've always done, just like they do with any new technology. And so it might take some time for people to get used to it. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is I think organizations that implement S4HANA are going to need to define for people what that process should look like. So in other words, if I want people to use Joule within their day-to-day processes, it's not enough just to say, hey, great news, guys, we've got Joule. You can just ask it stuff and you could just enter what you want. It's more like now we define a workflow and a process that says now instead of spending an hour or whatever it is looking for information, instead of doing this, now here's what we expect. We expect you to go into Joule and this is the process you follow. And you sort of create a blueprint using Joule and other tools that SAP offers. You have to create that blueprint of how people are going to use it, because just putting the tools there alone won't get the job done.
Right. That definitely makes sense. And I know you kind of touched on this too, on how it's inevitable that other ERP or other softwares are going to implement AIs as well. What opportunities does Joule, being one of the first ones, present for organizations looking to leverage AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how fast this is all moving with AI. SAP's moving fast. Microsoft, you could argue, is moving even faster. Companies that are using Microsoft D365, which is not the focus of this podcast, but for people that are using D365, they've got Copilot and some other tools that have been around for a little bit longer than Joule. But I think SAP's advantage here is they still are relatively on the forefront, relatively speaking, compared to other software vendors in terms of their AI adoption and the AI capability within S4HANA. But I think SAP has a pretty unique advantage in that, they are moving so many of their customers to the cloud. Here, they're trying to move a lot of them to the cloud, but also because they've got access to mass amounts of data. They have these really large organizations that are transacting just tons and tons of data. So that bodes well for AI. Now AI becomes more educated and more knowledgeable based on all these organizations. I think I read or heard somewhere, and this is unverified information, but it's in the tens of thousands from what I recall. I think it's like 30,000 SAP customers that are using S4HANA Cloud have agreed to allow SAP access to their data set. And I think we've talked about this in another previous episode. But I think that's, you think about that, you think about 30,000 organizations that are selling, however many transactions per month, per year. They're doing all these financial stuff. They're doing all this analytical work, and they've got their own AI models, their own predictive analytics just within their organization. But if you could take 30,000 organizations and all that data, all the algorithms that they're using to manage their businesses, and then create a smarter software, and Joule becomes smarter as a result, I think there's a lot that SAP could do with that, and they're going to have a distinct advantage in the enterprise technology space, in my opinion. I think SAP and Microsoft are probably the two front runners, in my opinion, on the whole enterprise technology usage of AI at this point.
Yeah, that's a super interesting perspective, and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing, actually, it just reminded me as we were talking about this, to get back to the audience question about, will SAP extend their deadline past 2027? Another data point I recall is from McKinsey, and McKinsey put out a study just in the last few months that showed that just around 1/3 of organizations that are on an old version of SAP have started the migration to S4HANA. So you still have 2/3 of SAP customers, legacy SAP customers, that have not yet started the journey to S4HANA. So that would be another nugget in favor of SAP most likely extending that deadline, because a majority of their customers haven't even started the process yet. So not to get too far off topic from Jolie, but that was just a kind of circling back to that original question and another thought I had on that.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, a lot of stuff happening with S4HANA. There's a lot of evolution of the product, a lot of implementations happening. Some of them are going well and some are not going so well. And we're actually going to talk about some, or one in particular, that did not go so well. And a lot of what we've talked about so far throughout this podcast season so far has been how to be successful and some of the trends to be aware of. We did cover back in episodes number 2 and 3. We talked a little bit about the U.S. Navy SAP failure. We talked about the Hershey's SAP failure in episode 4 or episode 3. But most of what we've talked about is just more how to be successful. But today we're going to sort of flip the switch a little bit and flip the script and look at a recent client of ours that actually had to pull the plug on their S4HANA implementation. And we'll talk to one of the consultants that was working on that project. The good news is that this same client has decided to restart the project, but they took sort of a timeout, if you will, and they put a temporary hold on the project, and then took a few months to regroup and figure out how they're going to navigate some of the challenges with the S4HANA product and some of the limitations of the S4HANA product. And now they're back to resuming the process. So we're going to dive into some of the dark side of S4HANA implementations and what to be aware of, just so you're aware and you understand the risks going into a project like this. We're going to bring Mitch Ottoson on the show here in just a moment to talk about lessons from a canceled S4HANA implementation. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, and welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. This is episode 1, season 6, or I should say season 1, episode 6 would make more sense. Our 6th episode of this show. You can find all the past episodes of this show at journeyto s4hana.com. You can also keep an eye on that same website for upcoming episodes as well. Every new episode that drops will be immediately available at journeyto s4hana.com. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that is not affiliated with SAP, but does quite a bit of SAP S4HANA implementations. including the evaluation of S4HANA and the implementation planning, as well as the program management, change management, and process improvement related to S4HANA implementation. So you can learn more about us at thirdstage-consulting.com. And this show is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast or feature your brand on this podcast, you can reach out to us. I've included contact information in the description field below, as well as in the scrolling ticker text thing that's right below where Darian and I are talking right now if you're watching this on video. So I'm excited to bring our guest on today. This is Mitch Ottoson. He's a director of strategy and transformation at Third Stage Consulting. And again, he's got a tech agnostic view of the world, but he has a lot of experience helping clients through S4HANA implementations. But there's one S4HANA implementation in particular we're going to hone in on here with him today. And that is a project or a client of ours, very large manufacturing client, that recently attempted to implement S4HANA, didn't go so well. There was some misalignment between what the S4HANA product could do and what the needs of the organization were. And also, quite frankly, there's some other factors at play that maybe had less to do with SAP as a product. But we're going to talk about all that stuff and just to expose some of the risks and things to be aware of, just so you can be aware of the pitfalls as you're going through your S4HANA implementation. Or if you're evaluating S4HANA, you just may want to be aware of some of these gaps as well. So with that all being said, Mitch, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you today.
Absolutely. This is a really interesting case study we're going to get into here in just a second. But before we dive into it, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Third Stage Consulting as well.
Sure. So my name is Mitch Ottoson. I'm Director of Transformation here at Third Stage. My role is really just to get to know our clients, understand what it is that they're trying to solve for, and figure out how we can help to solve their challenges with technology. I help to build out the team. And ultimately, I'm responsible for execution. So I always tell my clients as they're coming in, it's something that I need to be responsible for, making sure we do a good job. And so getting to know them up front is really important to me.
Right. The buck stops with you on
That's right.
delivery of a lot of these projects here.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to really jump into it, we're obviously uncovering or unpacking a case study here, and we can't reveal client names and super confidential information, but we can talk at a high level about some of the lessons learned and what the situation was at a high level. So what can you tell us about this particular S4HANA implementation that we were recently involved with?
Yeah, so the client was pretty large, and they were doing a S4HANA implementation. And just right off the bat, I think one of the things that sets this apart is that they pursued going for a project in the public cloud. There's an option with SAP to go public cloud or private cloud. And from our experience, the public cloud is just a little bit more of an unknown right now. It's a good fit for some, but maybe not a fit for others. And I think we found through the course of this project that it was not a fit for this client. Something else that also stands out is that they decided to go and do the implementation directly with SAP. So there are two things right off the bat that's, against some of the norms that we see in some of the more successful transformations.
Yeah. What was it about public cloud that didn't work for them just at a high level? What were some of the warning signs there?
Well, I think more than anything, the uniqueness of their business made it so that then the public cloud just couldn't accommodate to what made them unique. They're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. And they would have been better served by, at least my opinion is, they would have been better served by going with something that could have been a better fit for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times that public cloud option really forces you to adapt to the functionality of the software versus doing what a lot of legacy SAP customers are used to, just customizing their way out of any potential gaps or misfits. So for better or for worse, public cloud is sort of forcing you more into, you're going to accept the way the software works, whereas private cloud, and especially on-prem, is going to give you quite a bit more flexibility. So that's interesting to see.
Yeah, and that tends to be my recommendation to try and fit what the software does. But in this case, they're coming from a highly customized legacy on-prem solution, and they just couldn't make it fit in the public cloud.
Was this a situation where the software really didn't fit what they needed, or was it a situation where the people were just used to the way it was and they didn't want to change to fit the software, or was it some sort of combination of both?
I would definitely say it was a combination of both, but there were enough, whenever we're going through an evaluation for our clients, we always look for the secret sauce, and there was enough of what made them unique in their secret sauce that needed to be customized. And because of that, trying to do that in the public cloud just wasn't going to work for them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's something that oftentimes gets lost in the sales cycle when SAP or system integrator sales reps are trying to sell the software. Is they don't always tell you that you do probably have some secret sauce, and our software probably can't do everything you need it to from a secret sauce perspective. So you may need to figure out how you're going to close that gap. Whereas if it's something like accounts payable or invoice processing, something that's a little bit more standard across industries and across competitors, then yeah, maybe those are cases where you just want to adapt to whatever the software can do there. What was the legacy environment they were moving from? Not necessarily the exact systems, but just sort of were they an existing SAP customer?
They were an existing SAP customer.
Okay. And do you remember which version they were on? If it was ECC,
I want
or
to say
R3?
it was ECC 6, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of our S4 HANA clients are moving from ECC. And then in terms of the modules and maybe some of the non S4 HANA systems that they were deploying, what was the general scope of what they were deploying, both from a technology perspective and from a business process perspective?
It was an entire redesign of everything that they do today. So they saw it as an opportunity to really optimize their business process management. And so they had a team that was dedicated to trying to understand, what are we doing today? What is best practice, and how can we make ourselves mold to change what best practice is? So from that perspective, they were doing a lot of things right. They really spent a lot of time unpacking what the software can do, what it can't do, and where those gaps are. And also trying to make sure that they brought their team along from a change management perspective, and made them excited about the change and understand why the change was happening.
Right.
So that was a big part of it. From a technical standpoint, there was discrepancies at the top. Some were still tied to staying on prem. Others saw the benefit of the cloud, and so there were fights the entire way. Through their leadership team on what the best route was. They ultimately landed on, like we talked about, the public cloud. And so modernizing their technology was a big driver for them, and to reap the benefits of the BPM work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. So we're going to get into this here in a minute, as far as sort of the fact that this project was ultimately canceled, and they sort of put a pause on the entire project because they ran into some pretty significant issues. One of which you already mentioned, which is the public cloud not being a great fit for what the needs were. In addition to that, what were some of the other big challenges, or some of the biggest challenges, that this client and the project experienced?
I think I don't really want to call them out, but at the same time, it's worth noting that SAP, their core functionality is as a designer of software. They build a really good product, but you could tell that the team that was there to manage the project just didn't have a good feel for how to go through project management and actually how to deploy their software. So that's where we see a lot of the larger system integrators who, they have an entire practice that's built on this capability. We've seen them shine in some cases in some of these environments, and we didn't see that from the SAP team.
Yeah, and a lot of times clients, or we come across our clients who will say, why hire a third party system integrator when we could go directly to the vendor and hire what's presumably going to be the best resources? Who knows the software better than the vendor themselves? But I think, to your point, that's not always the case. In fact, it's quite common that SAP isn't necessarily going to have the best resources just because they're SAP. A lot of times a services based company is going to have a better set of resources to offer up.
Yeah, I completely agree. We talk about it with our clients. I'm sure you're familiar with the book Good to Great. He Jim Collins, I think, he talks about getting the right people on the bus in the right seats doing the right jobs, and this was a classic example of, we didn't have the right people on the bus. They weren't doing the right jobs.
Right. So you had public cloud was a mismatch with what the client needs were, especially as it relates to the secret sauce. They hire the technical resources directly from SAP, which turned out not to be good at project management and sort of managing an overall program. What other big obstacles or challenges did this client and project team face?
Well, I think understanding the size and the scope of the project, I think was really difficult for them. There was a core team that had a really good feeling for what needed to happen, but throughout the business, I think a lot of people viewed it as a technology upgrade. It wasn't a re-implementation and a huge strategic project. And so they weren't always getting the time and attention and resources that they needed to make this project successful. I think they were viewing it, some people viewed it more as yeah, we're going from one version to the next. So how much of a challenge can that be?
Right. Yeah. Just underestimating the effort and the pain that goes along with that. I'm here with Mitch Ottoson talking about lessons from a canceled S4HANA implementation. I've got a lot more questions for Mitch here that we're going to get to here in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Journey to S4HANA. Hi, this is Eric Kimberly, and I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting Group. And I wanted to take a moment and tell you a little bit about Third Stage and what we do and how we help clients through their S4HANA implementations. First of all, Third Stage is technology agnostic, meaning that we're not affiliated with SAP. However, we do have quite a bit of experience helping clients through their S4HANA implementations. We help clients evaluate and do a fit gap analysis of S4HANA. We help them find the right system integrator. We help them negotiate their contracts with SAP and their system integrator. And then we also help with implementation planning and the implementation itself. So we help mobilize the right resources, make sure you've got a solid and realistic program to manage overall S4HANA implementation. And then we'll help with the program management, the change management, as well as process improvement. We also provide some technical services around data migration, as well as architecture and system integration as well. So those are just some of the things we can do to help you through your transformation. And if you're looking for more information about it, or if you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to just bounce around ideas or be an informal sounding board for you as you begin your transformation. You can reach me by contacting me via the contact information in the links below in the description field for this podcast. So look forward to chatting with you, and we'll see you soon.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, and welcome back to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that has everything to do with S4HANA implementations, including the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of S4HANA projects. You can find new episodes of this show at journeytos4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, and it is sponsored by or produced by Major Tom Productions, which is the company that produces this and other podcasts related to digital transformation. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, you can do so by going to the contact information I've included below for Major Tom sponsorships. So I'm here with Mitch Ottoson from Third Stage Consulting. He's a director of strategy and transformation, and Mitch and I are talking about some lessons from a canceled S4HANA implementation just recently. It's a client of ours that had to put the project on hold, and there's some mistakes that were made along the way and some lessons, and we're going to take some of those lessons and share them with you, or continue sharing them with you here today. So let's jump back into the conversation with Mitch. You know, some of our clients, just as more of a side note or side question, we've worked with a lot of, or not a lot, but a handful of S4HANA customers or companies that are going through S4HANA implementations. And SAP, in some cases, either because of the industry they're in or the function that they're trying to deploy within SAP, if that capability isn't there within S4HANA, sometimes if the client's big enough, SAP will offer up this whole concept of co-innovation, where basically, they're going to build the capabilities that the customer needs. The customer oftentimes is going to pay for it, or at least pay for part of it. But then that becomes part of, the core functionality going forward. What is your take on that, just in general, kind of across our SAP clients, not just this one necessarily, but in general? What's your take on this whole concept of co-innovation? Is it as good as it sounds, or what are your thoughts there?
I mean, it sounds great on the surface because you're having someone that's catering to your needs, but it makes me nervous. It makes me nervous because there's a leading edge and there's a bleeding edge, and when you're on, I like being on the leading edge of technology. I think being an early adopter myself personally, I like seeing how technology can be folded in to make things better. That's new and cool technology. That being said, I don't want to be the first person who is trying something out. And given the track record that SAP's had over the last several years in trying to move people off of their legacy systems and into S4HANA, that's an environment for a perfect storm when you layer in the complexities of it's already hard enough as it is, and then you want to be one of the first companies to do it this way. It just seems like a lot of risk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes total sense. What about? I think we sort of circled around this concept a little bit, but the idea of change management and resistance to change. How, even though the project hasn't been completed yet and they stopped the project midstream, how would you view things from a user adoption or change management, acceptance of the new processes, new technologies? What was the general pulse of this client?
Well, it's tough because they had basically everything they needed in their ECC6. They had a group of people that have been working in the system for years. It was highly customized, and it was working. The real driver to get off of it was, the idea of we're going to have to do it eventually anyways, and SAP is making it appealing to do so. And in my opinion, that wasn't a strong enough case for change. We talk about, the burning platform. And if your people aren't aligned with, why I need to change and what the benefits are to me, they'll resist. And I don't think we saw a ton of intentional resistance, but when things got hard, people weren't really willing to dig in the way that they needed to. So it's that unintentional resistance that definitely wore on people.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think a lot of people, think about all the great investments that SAP is making in S4HANA. I mean, they've invested a ton of R&D in this product, and it's pretty fascinating to see. Everything from the HANA architecture and platform in the database to the investments in artificial intelligence and just innovation in general. In fact, we have another episode of this podcast where we dive into that with one of our guests as far as innovation and AI. And you think about all these cool emerging technologies that really are going to be enabled by S4HANA in the cloud. I mean, that's where the innovation is going to be in the future as SAP invests more money. But if you can't get people to just figure out how to close the books at the end of a period or how to process customer orders, AI and all that stuff doesn't matter, because you can't get the basic functionality to work for your business if you can't get the basic functionality to work for your business. So I think a lot of times organizations get enamored by all the stuff that S4HANA can do, and then they gloss over the big differences between S4HANA and ECC. I'm not saying S4HANA is worse than ECC or even better necessarily from core capability perspective, but it's different enough, to your point, that people oftentimes struggle with that and underestimate the effort to get there.
Yeah. And a lot of these customers are coming from that same situation where they're in a highly customized environment, because when they deployed ECC6, that was the culture of software deployment, was make it fit your needs. We built a highly configurable, robust solution, and we're seeing that being walked back quite a bit with cloud technology and standardization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's being further fueled by another topic we cover often on this podcast is SAP's Rise initiative, where they're trying to move as many customers, existing SAP customers, either on ECC, R3, or even S4HANA on-prem. They're trying to move as many of those customers over to public cloud as possible. And so they've initiated initiatives like Rise to make it more enticing to move people over. So SAP is definitely going that direction. They're going to push their customer base in that direction, but you just have to sort of be aware of the pitfalls and the landmines you're going to cross as you make that journey over. What were some of the, as we were helping this client through their process and through their overall journey to S4HANA, what were some of the early warning signs that the project might be in trouble? I know you mentioned at the beginning, you talked about they hired SAP as the system integrator. They went to public cloud when it wasn't a great fit for their needs. Those were two kind of early warning signs you mentioned. But were there other warning signs along the way that it made it increasingly clear that the project was in trouble and ultimately might get canceled?
Yeah, the writing was definitely on the wall. I think when we were talking about some of the adoption of some of the new modules, and the inability to show a demo of how it could work for them, there was one set of functionality around standard cost that this company was trying to deploy, and the SAP team could never give a full end-to-end demo of what it could look like for people to wrap their heads around. And there was always a reason why. And at first it seemed valid, but after you heard it a few times, you got to the point where it was like, we either need to see this or we need to stop right now, because we can't keep operating on faith that this will be here and meet our needs.
Right. Yeah. You hear that often with not just SAP, but even other ERP vendors will say, yeah, well, that's coming in the next release, or that'll be out, it's on the roadmap. Yeah. 6 months from now or 12 months from now. By the time you go live on this, it'll be there. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we build it in the meantime if it's not available yet becomes the big question there. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. How much of that do you think was the SAP technical resources not knowing or understanding how the software worked versus the functionality really didn't exist? Do you know the answer to that?
I would say that it felt like, and I don't know the answer to that, but it did feel like it was a good blend of both. It felt like our folks that were supposed to be experts were needing to check in with their team a lot, and so that just crippled a lot of the confidence that the team had. It was to the point where we were asking for the experts that they were talking to just join us on the calls, because we couldn't keep playing this game of telephone of what we needed and what we were getting back from the vendor. So yeah, I'd say it's a good combination of both, honestly.
And did that ultimately affect the timeline and the budget and everything? Just that back and forth and the resolution of issues and trying to figure out how the software could or couldn't work? Is that part of what slowed down the project?
Yeah, I would say that was probably one of the straws that broke the camel's back that then resulted in the project being put on pause. It was, we've been at this for several months and we still don't know what the software is even capable of, and we need to just shut this down right now.
So let's shift gears for a moment and be a bit hypothetical and say that, you're the newly appointed CIO of this company, and you can also go back in time. You can time travel now, which would be amazing. Let's say you go back in time, you're the CIO. What would you do differently? Like, how would you manage this project differently than it was so far?
Yeah, it's a great question. So stepping out of my DeLorean, I think that the first thing is the evaluation of public versus private. I think that there was a desire to do something special and to be cutting edge, and I think that really evaluating the right size and fit and result would have been great, but it's hard to put myself in that person's shoes, because, when someone's saying all these wonderful things about what their solution can do, it's hard not to get caught in that, because SAP is, one of the name brands in the space for a reason. But I think that would be, knowing what I know now, one of the first things I would have changed. And then also, I'm a big fan of having, bringing in an SI and then pairing that with the third-party resources like Third Stage. That's a really potent combination. We were able to unearth a lot of change impacts and help to drive the people forward in the idea of what's different and how it can change. And if we had the technical team to be able to match up with the picture of the future state that we were helping them to develop, I think we could have brought the team along very nicely. And so the ability to execute on the technical side was a big missing piece.
I'm here with Mitch Ottoson talking about lessons from a canceled S4HANA implementation. I've got a lot more questions for Mitch here that we're going to get to here in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Journey to S4HANA. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, and welcome back to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that has everything to do with S4HANA implementations, including the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of S4HANA projects. You can find new episodes of this show at journeytos4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, and it is sponsored by or produced by Major Tom Productions, which is the company that produces this and other podcasts related to digital transformation. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, you can do so by going to the contact information I've included below for Major Tom sponsorships. So I'm here with Mitch Ottoson from Third Stage Consulting. He's a director of strategy and transformation, and Mitch and I are talking about some lessons from a canceled S4HANA implementation just recently. It's a client of ours that had to put the project on hold, and there's some mistakes that were made along the way and some lessons. And we're going to take some of those lessons and share them with you, or continue sharing them with you here today. So let's jump back into the conversation with Mitch. You know, something you mentioned too that I think is worth coming back to is that, you know, a lot of times we as humans and leaders, especially in business, that we want to be at the forefront. We want to outdo the competition. We want to advance. We want to progress. And sometimes going with the latest and greatest bleeding edge technology is actually going to hinder your innovation. It's going to slow you down. It's going to cripple your operations, or it can cripple your operations. And sometimes it's okay to take a more incremental stepping stone approach to it. And, you know, it allows you to build up morale and momentum behind the project. You get some quick wins, and then you can get more aggressive as the project goes on, versus the companies that try to bite off more than they can chew. They try to take too big of a leap too soon, and the whole, you know, they fall flat on their face. And, you know, in the case of this client, they're sort of back to square one, although they do have a path forward that they're sort of putting together that we'll come back to here in just a minute. When this project was ultimately put on hold, and sort of looking at the morale or the mindset of the organization and the team right now, what's the general feel of the client? Like, are they nervous? Are they mad? Are they optimistic that they took the break and now they can figure out a better path forward? Or how would you assess that?
Yeah, I'm really proud of them and their leadership team. You know, they did the right things by just trying to learn from what went wrong. And to know, they knew that they were going to go at it again. It wasn't take it off the table, because realistically, there's nowhere else for them to go. Going over to, you know, another tier one just wasn't going to be a good fit for them. And so they knew that they were going to need to go back on, you know, to get back on the horse at some point. So they really took the approach of, kind of like the time machine exercise that we just went through of, what would we do differently? What did we learn about ourselves? And how can we position ourselves for success?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That is, really important to be introspective and reflective and kind of look at, what are we doing well? What could we do better? And, kudos to this client for calling a timeout. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
times we have so many clients where, we tell them you should probably pause this, or not
Yeah.
because you want to slow things down or create doubt or anything like that, but because you just need to figure some stuff out and have a clear path forward, which you don't have right now necessarily. It's
Yeah.
okay to take a step back or to hit the timeout button and say, we're going to kind of recast our plan, or we're going to wait until we have the right resources in place internally. Now you typically get immense pressure from SAP and or your system integrator to keep things going, because that's
Yeah.
the gravy train and the revenue stream that they're counting on.
Yeah.
But did this particular client, did they experience any of that pressure from SAP to not stop the project and just keep going?
Oh yeah, big time. It was C-level conversations going back and forth, and it's still ongoing. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's definitely a high pressure environment, and I think another really good thing that our client did was through this, they saw, you know through adversity, they saw some people really thriving, and really taking ownership of the project and doing a lot of things really well. And they promoted and positioned them to have an even more focal point in the next iteration. And so they're speaking from experience when they say, this didn't work for us last time, here's why. And so I think that they're very well positioned from a leadership standpoint to really do the right thing and be successful this time around.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Like a lot of good battle scars and lessons learned that they can take and move forward,
Yeah,
to forge a better path forward. Um,
absolutely.
what do you think other organizations can do? Speaking of lessons, what are some of those lessons that other organizations can learn to identify and mitigate risks like these that they experienced in their S4HANA initiative?
Yeah. You know, we touched on the ability to be introspective and to know your organization and to know yourself. Um, when we work with our clients, that's one of the things that we do a really nice job of, is getting to know you and to give you that unfiltered, unbiased analysis of who you are and what a good fit for you is. So if you're working with a third stage, or not, that's a really good exercise to go through and try and understand, is this meeting our needs? Is this something we want to do because it's cutting edge? Or are we getting caught in the sales cycle, and the bright lights are getting us? So trying to, and so much easier said than done, but try and really understand what's a good fit for us. What are we really trying to accomplish with this initiative, and how well is this lining up to our goals?
Right. Yeah. No, that's great advice. And, it's easy again to get enamored by the technology and forget about what our business goals are. What are we really trying to accomplish with this transformation? And also just
Right.
understanding, back to your earlier point, this is not an easy shift, especially if you're already on ECC or R3. Yes, you're going to get some familiarity with the SAP look and feel in general, but it's not going to be a lift and shift where you're just moving all your data over to a new system, but it's going to look and feel the same. It's a total rewrite of the software. It's an entirely different system. S4HANA is a totally different system than ECC or R3. And I think a lot of times customers don't know that or want to hear that when they plan for the
Yeah,
project. Um,
I agree.
so with this particular client, what are they doing to course correct going forward? So I guess the good news in all this is they haven't permanently canceled the project, but they've sort of taken this pause/timeout. What are they doing to course correct based on what we know so far?
Yeah, so what we know so far is that they're planning to implement and go with the private cloud. They are going with a system integrator that has a ton of experience within the space, within the particular type of manufacturing that they do. Um, they have leaders in the right position that are active change agents. They're identifying change agents early, and trying to empower them to go through and work through what's changing and what's going to happen, and doing that with their SI at their hip, and also a third stage at their hip. So it's a three in the box type of model where we're going through and going to help them identify in all the areas where things are changing, how they're changing, and to bring the users along in a way that gets them excited about how the change can benefit them.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good summary. And part of what our team is doing on this project and other S4 HANA implementations too is we don't do what a system integrator does as far as the really deep technical knowledge, the configuration and development knowledge of S4 HANA. We also don't know the client's business as well as they do, nor will we ever know the business as well as the client does. But our role is to connect those dots to create that connection between, what S4 HANA can do, current state of the business. It's all that business transformation stuff that's really the meat of the transformation. I mean, that in my opinion is a lot of the secret sauce that is what makes these sorts of projects successful.
Yeah, absolutely. We were recently on a different project where it was a rescue mission, and what we found was that the system integrator and the client were just not. They're talking past each other. They were not speaking the same language. What they were asking for, the system integrator, was just not even landing on deaf ears, but it was just going right past the client, and they weren't understanding. And so, being that intermediary and saying, "Here's what they're looking for and why," we were able to actually get past a pretty significant roadblock that it really stalled the project out for several months. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Being that unbiased, unfiltered interpreter is so valuable, especially with these large scale projects.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's we certainly have a lot of lessons from not only um, implementations that have stalled like this one, but also like you said, the recovery, the SWAT teams that we send in to go fix a project, and then there's the even one step more extreme project, which is it's already failed, it's gotten to a lawsuit phase of litigation, and we'll go in as expert witnesses to analyze why the project failed. And so there's a lot of good lessons from past S4 HANA failures and lawsuits that we bring forward into our approach and methodology to help avoid a lot of these same mistakes. But I think what you said there, as far as what the client in this case is planning to do differently going forward, and also what this means for other organizations and some of the pitfalls they should avoid, I think that's a great starting point there. And just to sort of wrap things up and to bring it all full circle, for those listening to this podcast and this interview that are about to embark on an S4 HANA implementation, perhaps they're in the midst of it or they're thinking about it, what sort of closing advice would you give? What are those top 2 or 3 recommendations you would give to a team that's early or in the process of going through their journey now?
It's a good question, and it would be hard to narrow it down to 2 or 3 things. But
Yeah.
I think what we've seen so far from moving from an R3 to an ECC6, or from R3 or ECC6 to S4 HANA, treat it like it is a brand new implementation, not that it's an upgrade, and really invest the time and effort into understanding the change and to helping the change management aspects of it, whether it be with a third stage or someone else, or if you have an internal change team. Really making that investment and making sure you understand the changes and what they mean to your users is one of the big ones. And the next is, if you haven't made the decision yet, really try and understand who you are as an organization, what the fit is of the software, and really question if it's the right approach for you and your team.
Yeah, and it's okay to poke holes in things. Even if you've committed to the path of S4 HANA, it's okay to question, like, do we really want public cloud? Is private cloud okay? You can still do
Right.
on-prem too. I mean, I know it's not cool to say,
Yeah.
but you can do S4 HANA on-prem. SAP may not want you to, but that is an
Right.
option.
Yeah.
And even just asking, do we have enough resources? Should we spend a little more time on the upfront phase 0 planning? Should we make sure we've got the change team in place before we get going on the project? I mean, it's okay to ask these sorts of questions, or even to your examples earlier about some of the functional gaps. It's okay to poke holes in it too and say, we don't expect this solution to give us 100% of what we need. That's okay.
Right.
But let's poke holes and understand where the gaps are, so that not that we can second guess our decisions, so that we can figure out what are we going to do about it and how does that affect our deployment plan. If it's an 80% fit versus a 95% fit, those are 2 very different implementation plans and durations and costs and resources and all that stuff. And if you figure that stuff out as you go, you're shooting in the dark as far as what the real time and cost and effort is going to be. So I think that's really well said. A good closing comment from you. It's make sure you take the time to ask those tough questions up front. I think that's a great sound advice there. So, well, good. Well, thanks for being here, Mitch. This is a great conversation, great case study, a lot we can learn from, from some of the challenges they had. So I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always love catching up and talking about these case studies. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you, Mitch. Great conversation. That was super interesting and not always pretty and not always fun, but super informative and educational to talk about a failed project or a troubled project. And so we appreciate you being so candid with some of the lessons there. There's some good takeaways and follow-ups we're going to get to here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Journey to S4HANA. If you're going through an S4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you can check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S4HANA implementations. The other is my S4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, and welcome back to the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show at journeytosforhana.com. You can also go to that same website to see past episodes as well as upcoming episodes and keep up with all the new episodes that we drop every week, at least for this first season. You'll get a weekly dose of this show through 13 episodes. So all that being said, Darian, we just had Mitch on the show talking about some of the challenges with S4HANA implementations, and one case study in particular of an organization that had to cancel or at least temporarily pause their S4HANA implementation due to a number of factors. But what were some of your takeaways or questions that came out of that conversation with Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think my takeaway is I love always hearing the different case studies, especially failed ones, and just personally, because I love being able to learn what can maybe organizations do in the future so they can avoid this sort of situation that nobody really wants to be in. So I found that super interesting, and I find every failure kind of interesting to really deep dive into a case study like that. So that was a really great learning conversation with Mitch.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, I thought, his comments about co-innovation and basically creating functionality that didn't yet exist. I mean, that's always a big red flag. Anytime you have, whether it's an S4HANA implementer or any other software solutions implementer, anytime they say they're going to create a solution with you or side by side with you, that's usually a big red flag, because now you're getting into custom code and custom development, which is a totally different strategy, totally different approach. It negates some of the business value that you get from taking a sort of an off-the-shelf system as it's built. And it also extends your timeline, adds risks, adds cost, and that sort of thing. And I also think it also raises the question, especially in this case, this is a manufacturing organization. They do process manufacturing for chemicals and things of that nature. Makes you wonder, like, why does the base product not fit that functionality or not yet support that functionality? And that's a really big deal and something worth noting, because, we talked about Joule early in this episode, the AI evolution and some of these great, cool new enhancements they've made with the S4HANA platform. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there's some just base functionality that hasn't yet made its way from on-prem R&D and on-prem functionality. It hasn't yet all made its way over to S4HANA. So it's kind of a weird bipolar mix of, emerging tech, really cool advanced stuff that old SAP products could never do, like R3 and ECC could never do, the stuff that we're talking about with Joule AI. But on the other hand, there's stuff that R3 and ECC could do just because they've been around for so long and they've been developed over decades by SAP. And in many cases, customers customized those products to fit exactly what they needed. And now they're moving to S4HANA Cloud, and suddenly, there's just more rigidity and it's not quite as flexible, for better or for worse. And there's some functionality missing that you might have taken for granted in some of the old products. So I think that's all, to me, that's a really important lesson here. And that's why I think as you begin your S4HANA implementation, it's so important to do a fit gap analysis to really understand, like, where are the fits, and then where are the misfits, where are the gaps in the product, so that we know what we're going to do about it, because those gaps are what's going to cause problems later in the implementation if we don't plan for them. So, for example, we may decide that we're going to get a bolt-on. We'll get a third-party system to fill some of the gaps of S4HANA, and that's okay. Not every system, most systems are not going to be everything to everyone and everything that any one organization needs. So it's natural to potentially want third-party systems that may or may not be offered by SAP. It could be an entirely different vendor. So, that helps you plan the project, helps you understand the risk, it helps you identify the cost. It helps you all be on the same page with what we're going to do when we get to this gap during the implementation. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to address it. But what ends up happening more often than that, though, is organizations have this blind spot. They don't know that there's functionality missing until they get to the implementation and realize this just does not work the way our old SAP product worked. Now, if you're not an existing SAP customer, you're not going to know what ECC or R3 had, so maybe it's not as big of a deal. But for a lot of existing SAP customers, it's a pretty big deal for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. I had a couple of questions going off of the conversation as well. So
Sure.
One thing that you guys mentioned was the pressure from SAP to continue the project despite the challenges that they were facing. How did that client in particular manage the pressure that they were feeling from SAP, and what strategies did they use to eventually be like, no, we need to pause for now?
Well, I think it was hard for them, but from what I understood and understand from Mitch and the team that worked more closely with this client, obviously they did end up making the bold decision to stop the project. Now, SAP and their implementation partner were not happy about that at all. They didn't want the client to pause the project. But I think, this was a situation where the client, I think, was seeing enough red flags during the implementation, and they had a strong enough leadership team that they knew that they had to do the right thing. And I think I commend them, honestly. I commend this client for doing that, because not enough organizations do it, or too many organizations think that they failed. Like, this is a massive failure if we put the project on hold. And to me, it's like, you're not. You're just hedging. You're managing risk. You're slowing things down. You're making sure you get the right plan and strategy in place. You're giving SAP time to further develop the product or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why you might pause the project. Not everyone's going to do it, but for a lot of organizations, it does make sense. And I think that's, the lesson for me and for others here would be, you've got to control the tempo of the project. You can't just do what the software vendor wants. And if the software vendor tells you can implement S4HANA in 12 months or 18 months, doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean you should. It's probably a bad idea to try implementing it that fast, especially if you're a larger organization. So you need to really add sort of a dose of reality and objectivity to that discussion and to that planning process.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that this client is now restarting their process to journey to S4HANA. So how is this client leveraging the lessons that they learned in their failure or their decision to stop implementing to now have something that is success, or an implementation that is successful?
Well, the good news is that I prefer to work with a client that has stubbed their toe or stumbled along the way in any sort of project, even if it wasn't, in this case, like the immediate project they're on right now, even if it was years ago. Having that organizational memory of lessons and things that had gone wrong and things they did well, it helps us as consultants, because when we come in and say, hey, you should do A, B, and C, because if you don't, here's the risk, they sort of get it because they've already been through it. A client that hasn't been through it is actually riskier and harder to lead, if you will, because they don't know. And they hear the sales messaging from SAP and their partners. They hear the sales and marketing messaging that makes everything sound so easy and so risk-free and just no-brainer sort of thing. And they want to believe that. And so it's a lot harder to cut through those clients and those organizations. So the fact that this client has made some mistakes and they kind of know where they stumbled, they know, they know what the reasons are why they stopped the project in the first place. And now as they get started again, they can be a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more cautious, and just be a little bit more strategic along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. These are some great lessons that everybody can learn when they're implementing they're going on their journey to S4HANA. So I think it's super interesting for a lot of companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And we're going to continue this theme next week of risk management and just sort of those blind spots to be aware of, but we're going to do it from the perspective of an attorney. We're going to have Marcus Harris on the show next week to talk about a lawyer's perspective on S4HANA implementations and contracts and just pitfalls, legal risks, and things like that you should be aware of. So we're going to cover that next week. So be sure to stay tuned and watch out for that episode, which will be released a week from today. So look forward to that. That'll be on episode 7 of this podcast. So thank you for another great show, Darian. Thank you to Mitch for being here today. Thanks to the audience for the great questions and participation throughout today's show. You can find all the past episodes you may have missed. If you missed any of the first 5 episodes, you can find them at journey2s4hana.com. You can also go to that same website to keep an eye out for new episodes as well. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms at journey2s4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with S4HANA implementations as well as other types of technologies. You can learn more about us at thirdstage-consulting.com. And the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. You can learn about sponsorship opportunities by going to Major Tom's contact information in the description below. So look forward to seeing you next week on Journey to S4HANA. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Take care.